in downtown Little Rock. This is Capitol View with your host, Jesse Tenor.
Good Sunday morning to you and welcome into Capitol View. I'm Jesse Tenor. More of the biggest items on the agenda for the 92nd General Assembly fell into place this week. Governor Hutchinson signed a bill to raise minimum salaries for teachers, and the state Senate passed the governor's highway plan. We also saw action on a handful of bills related to the death penalty. I'll talk to the sponsor of one of them coming up. But we begin with another big issue of the session, smoking. There are a lot of moving parts here. Ideas have been thrown out, legislation formed, some potentially already going back to the drawing board. Joining me now to discuss all of that is Michael Keck with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. Good morning, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Jesse, thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on. And I do want to say that before we begin, we did do our due diligence to get a member of the tobacco lobby on the show this morning as well to serve as your counterpart, but couldn't make that happen. So just wanted to make sure we said that for everybody there at home watching. So this does seem to be the session compared to years past to take on big tobacco, Michael. The Senate president tweeted about his desire to do so last week. There's a renewed push to raise the smoking age to 21. I think when you look at that, Democrats filed the bill back in 2017. Now there's this, more bipartisan approach with Republicans in both chambers actually being the lead sponsors. So why now are we seeing all of this? Is it mostly for that UAMS National Cancer Institute designation?
There's a lot of moving parts that's taken place. One is there is a tremendous appreciation and greater awareness for the fiscal impact that tobacco has on our state's budget. $795 million every year are additional costs incurred by our state's Medicaid budget because of tobacco-related illness. In addition to that, as we approach the legislative session, there seemed to be a heightened awareness of e-cigarette utilization by young people. Add to that, our statistics in the state of Arkansas show a higher than average use of cigarettes by our young people, higher than average, nearly twice the national average of oral tobacco products, non-smokable chewing tobacco, snuff. In addition to that, our adult utilization of tobacco is higher than the national average. So one of the primary responsibilities of our state legislature is to make sure that we have good public health here in the state of Arkansas. I am most appreciative of the fact that there's a willingness to look at some of these issues that can be addressed, some steps that can be taken that help us make our state healthier.
Speaking on that NCI designation, though, for UAMS, they need about $10 to $20 million a year from the state to be able to do this. So let's get into some of the proposals that would fund that. I know one would have taxed e-cigs and cigarette paper and then increased the tax on medical marijuana. Some have argued that it would also include some big favors in there for big tobacco, specifically some regulatory relief and tax reduction. It seems like this one could be going back to the drawing board. What was your take on it?
Well, it was a good opportunity to see some things out there that need to be discussed. I think anything that provides tax reduction and regulatory relief to the tobacco industry is counter to what we need to do in Arkansas. And so I'm glad that that bill has been withdrawn and there's a clean slate. I think what we need to do is we need to look at the impact of tobacco here in Arkansas. We need to be aware, our legislator needs to be aware that there are things we can do that can bend that cost curve, reduce utilization, and because of that, we can begin to be healthier as a state.
Now, we did see another bill sponsored by all Democrats, it looks like, that would impose a tax on e-cigs equal to the tax on tobacco products. Tobacco companies have used vaping to kind of replace lost cigarette revenue, and I saw, just to be fair, I wanted to have some of this to throw at you, but we have entities like the Heartland Institute writing about the push right here in Arkansas. They're calling it a tax on e-cigs, a disservice to tobacco harm reduction. What are your thoughts on those comments?
Well, harm reduction in regards to tobacco utilization is a mythical term that has not been backed up by good, solid science. Are there anecdotal stories of people that have utilized e-cigs and vapes to transition away and have completely quit? Yes. But the vast majority of times, what's taken place with e-cigarettes is it's a replacement. And there is a lack of long-term research and study as to its impact. And so I think for those that refer to it as harm reduction, you need to look at the nicotine that's in these products and see that in some cases there's more nicotine in e-cigarettes than what is in a tobacco product, a regular cigarette. And so there's a lot of research that still needs to be done, but there's a lot of things that we already know that prove that it's not a good, healthy alternative for us.
So would you support that legislation here?
Well, I want to find out more about the revenue that it generates, because I want to make certain the dollars that come forward are what are needed by UAMS and the NCI designation. I think what we also have to look at is more comprehensively than just what's taken place in regards to revenue and whether it's taxed or not. You know, teachers, education administrators, principals, every legislator out there has been contacted about the impact of the utilization of e-cigs and vapes on the day-to-day work in schools. I think the bill that's put forward is a good start and something we need to evaluate. I also think we need to make sure that the dollars generated are what we need at UAMS for NCI designation.
And then last year you went before the legislature's Tax Reform and Relief Task Force to fight for what people called an aggressive tobacco tax.
It would double,
it would have doubled, you know, the price per pack. Lawmakers, of course, did express concerns even to you in those meetings and stuff, just saying, you know, what if then a black market's developed? What if we lose business to our neighboring states? I don't know what a good answer is to all of this, or else there would be one already.
Well, I've got a good answer, but so far I don't think there's that many votes to get it all done. But I do want to say something that we're aware of. The Surgeon General has reported in all of their studies that price is one of the key things that keeps people from beginning smoking, and it encourages them to quit. And a tax that's at $1 or above has been proven to be effective at reducing utilization, and subsequent to that, beginning to improve the state's health and reducing the cost associated with it. That's why I've pushed for us to have $1 to $1.50 tax to generate the revenue that we need in the state to begin to bend that cost curve and begin to drop that utilization. You know, our incidence of lung cancer and death to lung cancer here in the state are where the country's was more than 20 years ago. It is time that we answer this opportunity to address that. I understand that there are many that are talking about, well, you know, it's a tax increase, we don't need to, but at the same time, we can't continue to ask the 75+% of the people that don't smoke to continue to pay for the Medicaid cost incurred by those that do.
What else would you want to see take shape, hit paper this session? Would we be able to see an increased tax, you think?
You know, I hope so. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about income tax cuts. I know the highway funding and transformation, all key things.
Right.
I would hope that it's something that could be brought forward and acted upon, because I think it is something that we need to do. I think the other thing that we need to do that is a direct as well as a long-term approach is the new bill that's out there that would raise the legal age to purchase tobacco products from 18 to 21. I think that's a great thing that we need to talk about. We need to make sure that we do it, we implement it with appropriate education and training of retail staff and sellers of tobacco products to make sure they know the importance of checking ID and making sure they understand the penalties that are involved. We need to make sure all the signage is there, and we need to make sure people know that when this takes place, you've got to be 21 to purchase the products. And the reason why that's so impactful is that 95% of those people that smoke, according to surveys, started around the age of 18. If we can delay that start and delay that implementation, we can begin to reduce the utilization.
Do you think that has good enough momentum to pass, though, Tobacco 21?
You know, I think there's a lot of interest in it. I've had a lot of questions from a lot of legislators about it. I think it's a good bill, and we're optimistic.
Okay, yeah, there's still time to be had in the session.
Right.
So, Michael, we appreciate you coming on the show to talk about it.
Thank you so much.
All right, and stay with us. Coming up after a quick break, I'll recap some of the big talkers at the Capitol from the last few days, including a push to ease Arkansas's law against assisted suicide. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
Sonic Signature Slinger for under 350 calories. Featuring a Sonic patty made with 100% pure beef, mushrooms, and seasonings. Say yes to flavor. Say no to guilt. Then say yes to flavor again. Don't miss out. Sonic Signature Slingers for $1.99. And try order ahead to get happy hour anytime.
Natural State Funeral Service provides Arkansas families affordable funeral services for their loved ones. Our traditional funeral service with a casket starts at $29.95. We also offer on-site cremation for $6.95.
A Natural State Funeral Service serves Arkansas families with dignity and respect.
Come on, raised on a dirty road. Grew up doing what my daddy told. Sipping from a jar, swimming in the water hole. Living this hick life, wild as a rodeo. Hick life, raised on a dirty road. Grew up doing what my daddy told. Sipping that jar, swimming that water hole. Living this hick life, wild like a rodeo.
Sold it. 2 Absolute Real Estate Auctions, Tuesday, March 26th. First at 11 a.m. in Greenbrier. 2 acres with a 5,000 square foot commercial building and highway frontage along Highway 65. The second auction the same day at 3 p.m. in Perryville, Arkansas. 97-acre outdoorsman's paradise with 40 acres of pine timber along Bull Lake Slough. Both properties to be sold to the highest bidders on auction day. Go to wilsonauctioneers.com.
Sold it.
Violence has plagued our city far too long.
But we can all do our part to help.
Anonymous tips can be the break police need to solve a crime.
If you see something, say something, you can remain anonymous.
Together,
we can declare victory over violence.
$2.99 for a Car Hop Classic. What a steal.
Steal? That's a heist. Put this on.
Disguise.
I don't think I can eat in this.
It's all part of the plan, my friend.
It's your last chance to get a quarter-pound double cheeseburger or Slinger Plus Tots for $2.99.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Welcome back to Capitol View. A new bill focuses on literacy by putting a funding source for Arkansas school districts on the line. Depending on the poverty levels of their students, schools get a certain amount of national school lunch funding. The money is not tied to feeding programs, but it does provide other crucial functions. A bill filed this week would put that in jeopardy if some school districts can't improve their reading readiness.
We're teaching reading wrong.
Arkansas educators now have to learn the science of reading before teaching their students to read. Currently, a third of Arkansas third graders cannot read at their grade level.
Why wouldn't we drop everything if we needed to in kindergarten through third grade and make sure kids can read?
State Senator Alan Clark, who serves on the Education Committee, filed a bill that would tie national school lunch funding to a district's reading level. The amount of funding is based on the number of kids that get free or reduced lunches at a school.
Those are the kids we have to teach to read. Once you teach them to read, the whole world is opened up to them.
According to the Arkansas Bureau of Legislative Research, schools currently use the money for things like tutoring and professional development. It does not fund food programs.
I would never starve kids.
We can be starved for learning opportunities and for enrichment opportunities and for those other kinds of things that are just as important almost to nourish our minds and our bodies.
Kathy Webb, a former state lawmaker and the executive director of the Arkansas Hunger Relief Alliance, argues the bill would penalize the state's neediest students.
The purpose of having this category is to provide more assistance to schools where there are concentrations of high poverty.
Under the bill, schools would lose the funding after 3 years if their reading proficiency continued to decrease.
I think it'll be enough to get some schools that are not focusing on reading to focus on reading.
Senator Clark believes the bill would pass through the House and Senate, but says he's not married to it if someone has a better idea out there. Webb would like to see a more holistic approach come out of the legislature that addresses things like summer reading programs and books for kids. Another bill already causing controversy at the Capitol brings up the issue of assisted suicide. Dan Douglas's legislation would allow doctors to help terminally ill patients and their lives. It's getting strong opinions from those on both sides of the issue.
Some things in life are worse than death.
A state lawmaker has learned this firsthand.
I've had friends that have suffered with cancer, bone cancer, be in a room and you hear a pop and it's a bone breaking from the pressure of the cancer inside.
Representative Dan Douglas filed a Death with Dignity bill for terminally ill patients. It would allow doctors to prescribe them with lethal doses of medicine they could get from a pharmacist to end their lives, if they prove to be clear of mind.
Really, it's quite a bit of paperwork and a lot of red tape and discussions with the family and the patient.
A faith-based group wants to kill the bill before these conversations begin.
There's not a crying need here in Arkansas for people to go out and kill themselves just because they have a bad disease.
The president of Family Council, Jerry Cox, says the state has resources for terminally ill patients, like hospice. He's also concerned about loopholes in the legislation.
They could be getting the drugs to kill somebody else if they wanted to.
Cox is hoping Arkansas's pro-life legislature delivers a similar vote in this case, if it gets to that point.
Life is sacred from the moment of conception until natural death.
But Douglas argues the state should not deny the dying a basic human virtue of the living, dignity.
Shouldn't people be allowed to go to sleep and end their suffering if that's what they want?
Douglas told me he did meet with the Hospice and Palliative Care Association of Arkansas late last week. The organization says it does not have an official position on physician-assisted suicide. Douglas plans to get more public input in the following weeks before ultimately running the bill. 30 men sit on Arkansas's death row. Attorneys for some of them say they have severe mental illnesses and should not be put to death. This week, one Arkansas lawmaker revived a push that would make it more difficult for a seriously mentally ill person to be sentenced to death. Representative Vivian Flowers' legislation would require a diagnosis before and after a death row inmate's conviction. If found to be severely mentally ill, they would instead serve life without parole. Mental illness claims can tie up death penalty cases in court for years. Flowers says having this legislation in place at the start of the trial process would cut down on that.
I believe that it really helps families of victims because it really, I think, helps prevent, years and years and years of appeals.
Flowers' colleague, State Representative Rebecca Petty, does plan to fight the bill. Her daughter's killer has been on Arkansas's death row for nearly 20 years. But Flowers does argue that her legislation would not be retroactive, so it would not affect him. And when we come back, I'll talk to Representative Petty about her views on the bill, as well as other legislation related to death row inmates filed in recent days. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.
Sold it. Lake Chico Absolute Waterfront Resort Auction in Lake Village, Arkansas. Tuesday, March 12th at 10 a.m. South Shore Resort features 8 lakefront cottage rentals, Blues Eat House Restaurant, a country store, bait shop, and a gas station. All on 2.6 acres of prime lakefront property. This incredible income-producing resort will be sold to the highest bidder on auction day. Go to WilsonAuctioneers.com.
Sold it.
Why are Subaru Outback owners always smiling? Because they've chosen the industry leader. Subaru Outback holds its value better than any other vehicle in its class according to ALG. Better than Murano. Better than Santa Fe Sport. Better than Edge. Make every adventure a happy one with Subaru Outback.
Maintain the love of your new Subaru with 2 years of complimentary maintenance.
I'm a club volleyball player, and I'm pretty good at it. I really like to run, get those tips up and stuff, but when my feet hurt, it just really is bad, and I can't get there because my feet are just this bad pain. I'm like, ow. So I told my mom, she took me into Good Feet, and I noticed that I've never really had the pain since then, so I really want to be on the women's national team, and I'm pretty sure that Good Feet is going to help me get there. My name's Taylor, and that's my Good Feet story.
See for yourself with a free personalized arch support fitting at the Good Feet store.
When you're in a collision, it is that moment when your life stops. I'm Alan LeVar with the law offices of Alan LeVar. We represent people who are injured in motor vehicle collisions. We keep our caseload small enough that we can give personal attention to every client. Every client that comes into our office has their case assigned to 2 attorneys, and one of those is myself. If their case goes to trial, I'm there with them. Check us out online at safearkansas.com or make the free call to our office. Ask for me personally, and I'll give you the help you need.
Hi, I'm Missy Gibson. At John Gibson Auto Sales, we offer our customers the opportunity to buy almost any vehicle. We have over 900 cars, trucks, SUVs, motorcycles, ATVs, campers, performance trailers, and boats. We will finance your purchase in-house regardless of your credit history. You can actually make your purchase from home or on the go. Simply go online to johngibsonautosales.com and take a virtual tour of our inventory. We call it shopping made easy. See you soon at John Gibson Auto Sales, in person or online.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Welcome back to Capitol View. It has been 22 months since Arkansas last executed a death row inmate. With no lethal injection drugs in supply, it's not clear when the next execution will happen. In the last few days, though, we have seen a handful of bills filed related to capital punishment. Joining me in studio to discuss that and more is the lawmaker behind one of them, Republican State Representative Rebecca Petty, and then State Representative Charlene Fite. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
So first, just because we led into this, I wanted to start with the death penalty. So according to the Arkansas Department of Correction, there are currently 30 men on death row in Arkansas, and then one of them, Representative Petty, is your daughter's killer. He's been there for almost, I think, 20 years in May.
Yes,
so this is the 20th year. So first of all, I just wanted to get your take. What do you think of the state's current protocols when it comes to lethal injection?
Well, right now we're kind of at it just a standstill because the drugs did expire. So we're trying to figure out, and I've been trying to work with the Attorney General's office and everybody as a team to come together and see how we can fix the issues that we have. So the legislation I would like to see would come in sort of a packet that addressed different things. And I've always sort of wanted to look at how other states handle this issue. And so Oklahoma, they passed a bill last session that addressed it by nitrogen hypoxia. Of course, everybody kind of blamed me for wanting to do the firing squad, which was not true at all. But it was just something that I wanted to look at from all the surrounding states of how they deal with it. Texas, I believe that they handle it very well. So I would like to bring Arkansas to a place that we could be able to handle it and do it right.
And then there was your colleague, State Representative Vivian Flowers. She filed a bill to exempt criminals with serious mental illness from a death penalty sentence. She says it will help families of victims by preventing years and years of appeals that you typically see with death penalty cases. She also said it would not be retroactive, since this does mainly just address, like the beginning of a trial process. So what did you think of that bill? It seemed like, at least from your Facebook comments, that you're pretty critical.
I very much disagree with that bill because, like my family, we've been in the appeals process for about 19 years, and I think once you go in and add additional things to that and new statutes, especially that address mental illness, that I think it's going to catch the families up and just cause years and years of litigation.
So you don't think it would cut down on that at all by kind of addressing it from the beginning?
I do not.
And then you've also filed a bill this week on the very topic, and it would limit the last meals that prisoners get on the night of their execution.
I don't think limit their meals, but I believe that we have death row inmates, for example. The man who murdered my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, he has had 4 last meals, and then we get caught up back in this mess of appeals. But I think that we shouldn't be able to just go out and get whatever they want. I believe it should be all in-house that they have. And my personal belief is they're not at a resort. They're there for capital murder, and that they should eat what the rest of the prisoners have that day.
And it sounds like, just from covering the executions back in 2017, that they mostly, I think 3 of them, they had fried chicken and other sides that it sounds like most of the prisoners were able to get, and then different desserts that they kind of made that day, and then another option just for communion.
One that bothered me really bad was like Butterfingers and ice cream with, I mean, you're not, the man who killed my daughter was that he killed a child. He killed a child, and to reward that, to me, just seems so wrong as a crime victim. And I'm speaking as a crime victim here and not as a legislator. So it's very bothersome, and I feel like I've been put in a place where I can make some effective change and respect and give crime victims the dignity that they deserve. And I think that's only fair. My daughter didn't have a last meal. In fact, she was warming up some chicken when she was kidnapped and murdered, so she didn't get her last meal. And people might look at that as hateful or vengeful. I look at it as I'm just being a mom.
And then Representative Fite, I know that you've been able to work on different parts of criminal justice as well, especially when it comes to domestic violence. Moving forward, what would, I think you have 2 bills that you are looking to run in judiciary. What would those address?
Well, thank you for that question. One of them concerns confidentiality. We're concerned about the domestic violence shelters and centers with being subpoenaed and having to reveal too much information about the women and sometimes the men who come to them for help. And then the other has to do with making domestic battery congruent with battery in the first degree, with just matching the 2 definitions. So it's just a matter of getting the language straightened out and getting that done. I don't think that will be a difficult bill once we get the language exactly as it should be. But all of us in the Republican caucus stand with Representative Petty, and we consider her our hero as far as representing the victims of crime, because she truly knows the pain and she knows what these families go through.
Then I guess that this could be a tough question, but I know that you wanted to become a legislator because of the horrible experience that you went through. Is it hard kind of reliving that in a way all the time when you're talking to constituents, when you're, fighting for bills, things of that nature?
It's become such a part of my life that to talk about the things that happened with Andy, it's just become who I am. It's been 20 years, so it just is what it is. And instead of going down a road of drugs and alcohol and trying to deal with the pain, I deal with it in a different way of trying to make positive change and create a legacy for her.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
Thank you. I think Representative Fite does a really good job of fighting for victims. I'm just so proud that many of our colleagues will stand up and fight for women and children and victims, and it's so refreshing to see. So I appreciate all of our ladies who fight.
Well, Representative Petty, Representative Fite, thank you so much for being on the show. We appreciate you giving us a look inside some of the work that you're doing this session.
Thank you.
And stay with us. We'll be back to wrap it up after this. You're watching Capitol View on Sunday morning.